Welcome to this week's lecture on Python variables. Today we'll discuss variables, duck typing, naming rules, assigning and reassigning variables, multiple assignment, swapping variables, and deleting them. We've said this before. A variable is a container holding values. It lets us refer to the value later in the program. If we declare a as 110, we can later read it, use it, and even change the value. When defining a variable, we do not declare the type of data it will hold. We say Python is dynamically typed because the type is determined at runtime. This is done by checking the types of everything in the expression. Here, a is an integer. Being dynamically typed also means what once held an integer can now be assigned a string. A held 110, which was an integer, but now it holds the string dinosaur. Python follows the philosophy of duck typing. Since the burden of determining type is lifted off the shoulders of the programmer, it falls on those of Python. So it assumes, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. Now we know we can use a variable to store a value. But what shall we call it? Can we call it anything? Python has a few rules set in place so we can safely name variables without causing any conflicts. We call these identifiers. Let's begin with the rules. The first letter can only be one of capital A to Z, small a to z, or an underscore. The rest can be letters, digits, and underscores. An identifier may even just be one character long. Identifiers are case sensitive. You can have two identifiers, name and name with a capital N, in one scope. We'll talk about scope in another session. Python reserves some keywords for special purposes, and you cannot use these to name your variables. Some of these are and, as, assert, break, plus, and many more. We'll discuss all of these as we progress through the course. We just discussed the rules for naming variables. In front of you right now are 8 identifiers. Can you now guess which ones are valid and which are not? 9lives is invalid because it starts with a number. Flag is okay. Underscore 9lives is valid because it can begin with an underscore. Hello is invalid because an identifier cannot contain quotation marks, let alone begin with one. Your 2 is okay because the number 2 is not at the beginning. Underscore and $2 is invalid because even though it begins with an underscore, it contains two dollar signs. An identifier cannot contain a dollar sign. Global is invalid because it's a reserved keyword. And quarks is invalid because an identifier cannot begin with or contain an asterisk. If you follow the rules, you're good to go. But there are certain naming conventions you should follow to keep it consistent. This also makes it easier for others to read and follow your code. Class names should begin with capital letters. Everything else should begin with small, or a number, or an underscore. A private identifier should begin with an underscore, as in username. Again, a leading underscore is before something and a trailing underscore is after it. Strongly private identifiers should contain two leading underscores, as in password. Python has some special identifiers which both begin and end with two underscores. Now you know what a variable is. But you cannot access a variable before assigning a value to it. Here, we try to print the value of quantity, but it gives us a name error. To assign a value to a variable, we use the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. Here, 20 plus 30 into 2 is an expression. You cannot assign a variable to a literal or to a boolean, but you can assign a variable to another. If you wish to assign values to multiple variables at once, you can do it in one statement. Age, city is equal to 23, Indore. This way, age gets 23 and city gets Indore. You can also assign the same value to multiple variables at once. Here, both age and favorite get the value of 7. Swapping two variables is simple in Python. In C++, you would need 4 lines of code to do this. First, initialize A and B, then add A and B and store it in A. Subtract B from A and store it in B. And finally, subtract B from A and store it in A. Or you could use a third variable to temporarily store values while swapping. But in Python, you get this done in 2 lines of code. Initialize A and B, then swap their values with tuple unpacking. We'll talk of this in detail later. If you would like to delete a variable, you can use the keyword del. We declare a variable A and then delete it. Now when we try to print it, we get a name error. That is all for today. You can go over the lecture again if you wish to revise.